My name is Maria, and for 50 years, I thought I knew the meaning of true friendship. 50 years is a lifetime, enough time to raise children, bury husbands, celebrate triumphs, and weather countless storms, all with Janet by my side. She was the one who held my hand when my John passed, the one who first suggested the idea for The Beacon, our nonprofit dedicated to helping single mothers in our small, loving community. Now, at 75, running The Beacon is what keeps me going. It's my legacy, my heart's final, vital beat. It is a place of true hope, offering childcare, job training, and a warm meal to women who feel the world has forgotten them. They call me a matriarch, a hero. I simply call them my girls. Janet was more than my friend. She was the nonprofit's treasurer, a role she took on with a meticulous efficiency I envied. Everyone in town respected Janet, her smart, tailored suits, her stern but fair demeanor, her uncanny ability to make a budget spreadsheet sing. She was the rock of the Beacon's finances, the one who handled the cold, hard numbers so I could focus on the warm, soft human needs. That's why the first flicker of doubt, that cold, unsettling sensation that first curled in my gut a few months ago, felt like a betrayal of my own memory. It started small. A simple discrepancy in the quarterly report I used to review before our board meetings. Janet dear, about the Gala of Hope Seed Fund, I asked her one crisp October morning in her cozy cedar-paneled office. The air always smelled faintly of expensive perfume and freshly printed paper in there. It seems we're down nearly $4,000 from where we were last quarter. Did we approve an unbudgeted expense I've forgotten about? She didn't look up from her monitor, her fingers clicking rapidly on the keyboard. Oh, that, Maria. It's nothing to worry about. Just the new banking regulations, you know? They're holding funds longer now. Complex audits before they can settle larger nonprofit transfers. It's all tied up in transit. Perfectly normal. Just an outdated number on your old report. Her tone was dismissive, almost condescending, the way one speaks to a child who's asked a silly question. It stung, but I let it go. Janet was the finance wizard. After all, my expertise was in people, not ledger lines. But then, the small stings started coming closer together. A week later, our largest corporate donor, Westwood Industries, called me directly. Mr. Henderson, the CEO, a kind man who had supported us for a decade, sounded concerned. Maria, I just wanted to confirm you received our check. It cleared our account 2 weeks ago, but my assistant got an odd email bounce back from your organization's finance inbox. My heart skipped. Oh yes, Mr. Henderson, thank you. Janet is handling the deposit personally. Probably just a server glitch with the email. You know how technology is these days. I'll have her confirm its receipt this afternoon. I walked straight back to Janet's office. The Westwood Industries check, a hefty $50,000, uncomfortably heavy in my mind. Janet, the Westwood check. Did you deposit it yet? Mr. Henderson called. He says it cleared their bank 2 weeks ago. This time, she stopped typing. She slowly turned to me, her face a mask of weary exasperation. Maria, I told you. The complexities of these corporate checks are maddening. They require a separate, special verification process under the new KYC, Know Your Customer rules because of the large amount. I'm having to deal with the bank's corporate liaison directly. It's an absolute headache. Can you please trust me to handle the financial side without the constant second-guessing? She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. Honestly, Maria, you look tired. Perhaps you should let me deal with the stress of these modern accounting protocols. Maybe you need to take a step back from the books and focus on the mothers. The implication hung in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. You're old, you don't understand, and you're getting in the way. My hands trembled slightly, not with age, but with a cold, slow-burning anger. I had founded this place. I had poured my entire life savings and 40 years of work into it. Yet the woman I trusted implicitly, my best friend, was treating me like a dotard. I swallowed my pride. I understand, Janet. I just worry. Every day that money isn't deposited is a day we can't buy formula or pay our rent. It's fine, Maria. Just let it go. But I couldn't. I couldn't let it go, not when the young face of Sarah, one of our newest mothers, flashed in my mind. Sarah, who was working 2 minimum wage jobs just to keep a roof over her baby's head, depended on us for the subsidized daycare. My first act of real defiance came that afternoon. I waited until Janet went out for her suspiciously frequent lunch meetings, and I walked straight into her office. I found the Westwood check, not in a safe, not in a deposit slip, but tucked carelessly inside a worn, leather-bound folder labeled Pending Paperwork. It wasn't endorsed. It hadn't been to the bank. It was just sitting there, a lifeline for my girls, being held hostage by my best friend's flimsy excuses. A shadow of a doubt had grown into a chilling granite certainty. Something was terribly wrong. The simple excuses, new banking regulations, complex audits, old age, were beginning to sound like a sophisticated, calculated lie. And I knew, with the horrible, crushing weight of premonition, that my best friend was the one telling it. The worn leather of Janet's pending paperwork folder felt like rough sandpaper against my fingertips as I left her office. The discovery of the $50,000 Westwood Industries check, still sitting there, undeposited, was no longer a shadow. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of reality. It wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate. No competent treasurer, let alone a friend who co-founded this organization with me, would carelessly hold on to a sum that represented months of rent and utility assistance for our families. When you're my age, you learn that the biggest betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from the people whose hands you've held through decades of Christmases and crises. The sheer disbelief was a physical weight, pressing the breath out of me. But a lifetime running the Beacon has taught me how to put despair aside and focus on the mothers and children who depend on us. I couldn't afford to crumble. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. My investigation began the next morning. My office, unlike Janet's sleek, modern chamber, is a museum of paper trails, filing cabinets stuffed with annual reports dating back to the 90s, and, most importantly, my old, beautiful handwritten ledger books. Before Janet took over 5 years ago, I kept meticulous records in these hardbound books, noting every check, every donation, and every outgoing expense down to the penny. The digital files Janet preferred were untouchable, password protected, and far beyond my computer skills. But Janet's job required her to provide me with printed monthly summaries, which I had, religiously, cross-referenced and filed. My method was painfully analog, but reliable. I was going to use my paper past to expose her digital present. I started with the Gala of Hope Seed Fund, the one she had first dismissed as tied up in new banking regulations. I pulled the last 2 years of printed quarterly summaries and spread them across the antique mahogany table I use for board meetings. The contrast between my neat copperplate script in the 2018 ledger and the terse blocky font of Janet's 2025 printouts was jarring. I saw the first pattern instantly. Every month, for the last 7 months, there was a deduction from the seed fund, always on the 28th day, and always an amount between $800 and $1,500. They were coded as admin fee compliance. In my years, an admin fee was something like the $15 annual fee for paper statements, or a $5 charge for an overdrawn account, something that never happened. These fees, totaling over $9,000 in less than a year, were monstrous, and they were utterly inconsistent with the actual fixed banking fees, which were listed separately and correctly. I checked my 2018 records, $0 in admin fee compliance. I checked the 2020 records, $0. This was a recent, calculated addition. The feeling of cold certainty began to morph into a deep, unsettling fear. This wasn't skimming. This was a deliberate, systematic extraction. The larger, more terrifying gap, however, showed up when I looked at the actual major donor deposits. I had the physical records of 5 separate, large checks received in the past 6 months, donations ranging from $10,000 to $30,000. I knew the dates they arrived at the Beacon because I personally wrote the thank you letters. I cross-referenced the arrival dates with Janet's printed deposit records. For 3 of the 5 checks, the numbers matched perfectly. But for the other 2, a $25,000 check from the Riverwood Foundation and a $30,000 check from Mr. Peterson's trust, the summary showed the money arriving, but only after a delay of 6 to 8 weeks. Delayed deposit is one thing, I muttered to myself, rubbing the bridge of my nose. But where was that $55,000 sitting for nearly 2 months? It wasn't in the safe. I checked that safe daily. Then I noticed the cryptic note Janet had typed on the printout next to those 2 delayed entries. Awaiting clearance on intermediary transfer. Intermediary transfer? The Riverwood Foundation and Peterson's Trust always wired money directly or sent a cashier's check. They didn't use intermediaries. Why would a donation need to be transferred before it was deposited into the Beacon's primary, long-standing account? It made no sense unless the money was making a detour. By the end of the day, my mahogany table was drowning under a sea of highlighted paper. I had found $9,000 plus diverted via false admin fee compliance entries. $55,000 delayed and noted with a bizarre intermediary transfer. $50,000 from Westwood Industries currently unaccounted for, the undeposited check. The total, well over $114,000, was enough to bankrupt the Beacon and immediately halt our job training programs. It was enough to shatter my 50-year reputation and destroy the lives of my girls. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. The truth, as bitter as poison, had to be forced out. I waited until 5 o'clock, when the last volunteer had left, and the only light in the building came from the dim glow of the hallway lamps. I knocked sharply on Janet's office door. "Come in, Maria." "Are you still here?" "Don't worry about locking up. I'll take care of it," she said, not looking up. She was reviewing a document on her screen, looking professional, essential, and entirely in control. I walked in, holding only the 2 deposit summaries with the awaiting clearance note folded neatly in my hand. I needed to be calm, specific, and surgical. "Janet, I need to talk to you about the Peterson Trust donation," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. She finally swiveled her chair around. The look on her face wasn't one of concern, but of practiced annoyance. "Maria, I thought we discussed this. Everything is under control. I'm preparing for the board meeting. I don't have time to review old figures." "It's not an old figure, Janet. The $30,000 from Peterson arrived on May 1st. Your record shows it was only deposited on June 29th. That's nearly 2 months of delay. And this note you wrote here, awaiting clearance on intermediary transfer." "Who is the intermediary, Janet?" Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, I saw a flash of something cold and utterly foreign. Not the exasperation of a friend, but the calculation of an adversary. "Good grief, Maria. Are you really doing this? Are you questioning my bookkeeping?" Her voice rose, hitting a sharp, defensive register. "It's called modern cash management, Maria. The world doesn't run on paper ledgers anymore. Large nonprofit funds are often required to pass through secure, interest-bearing escrow accounts to manage currency fluctuations and mitigate risk before being cleared by the bank's compliance division." She pushed herself up from the chair and moved to the window, adopting a posture of injured patience. "I know you're used to the simpler days, Maria. You and your little notebooks. But we are handling millions of dollars now. If you don't understand the terms, escrow, intermediary, KYC, compliance audit, you have 2 choices. You can trust the person who spends hours learning the regulations, or you can step away from the financial side entirely, because you're creating unnecessary stress for me and, frankly, for yourself." She turned back, fixing me with a look of patronizing pity. "I think the board would agree. Your heart is in the right place, always. But maybe you've reached the point where the complexity of running a modern nonprofit is simply too much. You should be spending time with your grandchildren, not worrying over numbers you don't grasp." The gaslighting was masterful. She hadn't just dismissed my evidence. She had attacked my sanity and competence, weaponizing my age against my integrity. She was trying to make me doubt the very clear evidence in my own hands. Is she right? A small, frail voice of self-doubt whispered in my mind. Could I really be that out of touch? But then I remembered the $9,000 of made-up fees. I remembered the undeposited check. No banking regulation required a 2-month delay on a simple cashier's check. No complexity of modern finance demanded the invention of $9,000 in fees. I stood my ground, my hands clutching the printout so tightly my knuckles were white. I understand the difference, Janet, I said quietly, looking her straight in the eye. I understand the difference between complexity and a lie. I understand that you have invented these regulations, and I know that the admin fee compliance is a fictional expense line used to funnel money out of this organization. I expected her to shout, to cry, to fold. Instead, she laughed, a sharp, mirthless sound that scraped against my nerves. You've been watching too many crime shows, Maria. You're stressed. Take a holiday. I'll speak to the board about putting you on a mandatory leave of absence to ensure your health and the smooth transition to current financial standards. She was framing me right there in front of my face. She was laying the groundwork to push me out and pin the eventual bankruptcy on my inability to manage modern accounting. I said nothing more. The conversation was over. Logic was useless. Friendship was dead. I turned and walked out, leaving the sound of her calm, dismissive humming in the quiet hall behind me. I realized then that my old-school paper ledgers and my 75 years of good sense were not enough to fight this digital, cold-blooded betrayal. I had to go digital myself. I had to find someone who spoke Janet's language, the language of servers, code, and traceable transactions. The Beacon's funds were hemorrhaging, and my dear friend was the executioner. The next step had to be swift, silent, and smart. I needed an ally. The confrontation left me bruised but resolute. I knew exactly who I needed to call. My ally came in the unlikely form of Lenny. Lenny wasn't a private investigator or a former accountant. Lenny was the 19-year-old son of Carmen, one of the single mothers the Beacon had helped 2 years ago. Lenny was a computer science major at the community college, shy, perpetually wearing a hoodie, and a genuine digital prodigy. He owed the Beacon a great deal, and he owed me, Maria, his loyalty. I met him late one evening at the local diner, choosing a public but quiet place. I laid out the evidence, the printouts, the coded entries, and the Westwood check dilemma. I omitted the personal betrayal for now, focusing only on the financial discrepancy. Lenny looked through the stack of highlighted papers, the admin fee, compliance line entries, the intermediary transfer notes, with a focused, almost clinical detachment. This isn't complex, Maria, he finally said, his finger tapping the repeated entries. It's sloppy. This admin fee compliance is just a recurring transfer he set up. It's too regular. And awaiting clearance on intermediary transfer, that's a classic masking technique. She's moving the money from the donor to a holding account and then to the nonprofit's account. But why the holding account? That's what I need you to find, I whispered. I need you to trace those small transfers and that intermediary holding account. Can you do that without accessing Janet's passwords? Lenny grinned, a rare, bright spark on his face. If she's doing this on the nonprofit's network, she's leaving breadcrumbs. Every financial transaction leaves a trace, Maria, especially digital ones. I can't hack her, but I can check publicly available records, search for associated company names, and look for IP addresses that ping the Beacon server. I can look for a shell. We agreed on a plan. Lenny would use the weekends to work remotely, leveraging the vague names and suspicious routing numbers I had transcribed from Janet's summaries. My job was to keep Janet distracted and, crucially, to obtain any new printouts she produced before she shredded them. A week later, Lenny called me, his voice tight with excitement and dread. I found it, Maria. The intermediary. He explained that he had cross-referenced the unique routing number associated with the intermediary transfer description against business license filings. It wasn't a bank escrow account. It was a business entity, JAN Enterprises. It was registered 6 months ago in Delaware, Maria. Low regulation state. No employees listed. Just one primary contact who is the sole director and officer, Lenny explained. Guess whose name is on the registration? My eyes closed. I didn't need to hear it, but I did. Janet Ann Novak. Lenny said the name, making it sound like a sentence. She registered a shell company using her maiden name initial. It's a classic structure for financial diversion. The beacon money goes to JAN, sits for a few weeks, and then a delayed deposit is made to the nonprofit. She's siphoning money from that delay. The scale of the betrayal had suddenly zoomed in and become intimately personal. It wasn't just the treasurer stealing. It was Janet Ann Novak, my best friend, stealing under her own initials. I asked Lenny to focus next on the small, recurring $800 to $1,500 transfers labeled admin fee compliance. That's where the fun is, Lenny said grimly. JAN Enterprises has a second outgoing payment stream. I traced the IP addresses and merchant codes for the automatic payments. Maria, JAN Enterprises isn't paying for office supplies. It's paying for digital casino credits and high-interest short-term loans linked to several offshore entities. The cold terror I had felt was replaced by a surge of pure, sickening realization. A gambling addiction. It was the oldest, most destructive secret of all. The structured, calculated thefts weren't for a yacht or a secret apartment. They were for the desperate, mounting payments of a spiraling debt. The woman who preached fiscal responsibility to the board was secretly betting the Beacon's future on the spin of a digital wheel. She was using the rent money for single mothers to fund her private vice. With the shell company exposed, Janet's behavior grew colder, mirroring the desperation of her debt. The next board meeting was a nightmare. I came armed with my paper trail, ready to raise the discrepancies about the admin fees and the delayed deposits. But before I could even open my mouth during the finance report, Janet struck first. She stood at the podium, looking elegant and composed in a navy suit. She presented her own report, detailing what she called alarming inconsistencies in the nonprofit's historical expenditures. "I'm sorry to bring this up, ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "but my detailed audit has uncovered several areas where our spending control, managed by our founder, Maria, has been generous." She projected an old photo of me, smiling, standing next to the newly renovated kitchen years ago. The kitchen renovation, for instance. Maria signed off on a cost that was 20% over the initial bid. And the continuous expenditure on physical paper ledgers, an archaic practice that leaves us vulnerable to error. It was a subtle, planned assault. She didn't accuse me of stealing, but she created a clear narrative. Maria is fiscally irresponsible, outdated, and prone to error. She concluded with a motion that struck me like a physical blow. To ensure we maintain modern financial best practices and security, I propose that the treasurer be granted the sole signatory authority for all checks and transfers exceeding $5,000, effectively removing the founder's final check and balance role in banking operations. The air went out of the room. The board members, good, decent people, looked at me with worried confusion. Janet had framed the motion not as a power grab, but as a necessary modernization to save the organization from my old age and incompetence. I stood up, shaking off the paralysis of shock. "Madam Chair," I said, my voice low but carrying, "I must object. The dual signature system has been the bedrock of our security for 20 years. If there are questions about the kitchen renovation, I can provide the invoices. As for my ledgers, they are what allowed me to find a $9,000 discrepancy in the last 7 months of admin fee compliance, which I believe is simply a line item used to siphon funds." Janet raised her hands in mock surrender. "There you have it, folks," she said to the board, shaking her head sadly. "The very reaction I feared. She's seeing conspiracies. The $9,000 is a series of entirely legitimate, documented fees related to the new AML regulations, anti-money laundering, which are a critical part of modern nonprofit governance. I've sent the full compliance breakdown to your emails, but Maria, with her paper system, wouldn't have received it. It was an impossible position. She had the digital documents, the technical terms, and the air of professional authority. I had the truth, but it was packaged in suspicion and hurt feelings. The motion was tabled, but the damage was done. Janet had successfully planted the idea that I was the problem. That night, Lenny sent me the final, damning pieces of information. It was a link to a private online gambling forum. I found a cross-reference between an IP address that logged into JAN Enterprises and a consistent user on this forum, Lenny explained in a text. The username is Vegas Vixen 70 feet. It's her, Maria. She's detailed her life, her debts, and her plan. She's been writing a diary of the whole thing. I clicked the link, my old hands gripping the mouse. The screen lit up with a post under the pseudonym, dated just last week. The title of the post made my blood turn to ice. Almost there, just gotta push out the old lady. I started to read, my vision blurring with tears of profound, soul-crushing loss. It was Janet's voice, not the calm, tailored voice of the treasurer, but the raw, desperate voice of an addict and a betrayer, chronicling her plan to steal the gala money and pin the blame on her dottery old friend. The reading took an hour. The devastation it caused will last a lifetime. But with every paragraph, my broken heart was filled with a cold, unbreakable steel. She had not only stolen our money, she had signed her own confession. The date of the Gala of Hope was exactly 1 week away. I knew exactly where I had to confront her, and I knew exactly what I had to bring. I had lost a friend, but I would not lose my integrity or the beacon. Words from the online forum, "Just gotta push out the old lady," were branded onto my mind. They tasted like bile and ash. It wasn't just theft. It was a planned character assassination designed to shield her from the consequences. Janet had given herself away. She knew, perhaps not definitively, but instinctively, that I was onto her. The only way she knew how to fight back was to burn the foundations of my reputation before I could reveal the truth. The following days were a slow, agonizing descent into a public war of attrition waged entirely by Janet. She stopped communicating with me directly, routing all nonprofit inquiries through her administrative assistant, a nervous young woman named Chloe. If we were forced to be in the same room, Janet treated me like a ghost, utterly invisible and irrelevant. But the silence with me was matched by a sudden, loud campaign of whispers throughout the community. It started with the major donors. Mr. Henderson from Westwood Industries called me, not about the undeposited check, which I now knew was only delayed because Janet was desperate to float the money, but about a lunch he'd had with Janet. Maria, forgive me for asking, but Janet was expressing some, concerns about the beacon's operational stability. She mentioned that you'd been having trouble with the new digital systems, that perhaps the pressures of managing the organization were becoming taxing. I gripped the phone, forcing my voice to remain even. Mr. Henderson, the beacon is entirely stable, and my focus is sharper than ever. I assure you that I am more than capable of managing our operations, digital or otherwise. I believe Janet may be misinformed. Next, she targeted the volunteers. I overheard two of my most dedicated women, Barbara and Susan, speaking in hushed tones in the supply closet. Janet says Maria almost messed up the rent payment this month because she forgot to authorize the new online portal, Susan whispered. Barbara replied, "She told me Maria's been so forgetful she nearly double paid the insurance premium last week. It's sad, isn't it? She's a legend, but maybe it's time she stepped down gracefully." Everywhere I turned, the ground was being poisoned. Janet wasn't just embezzling funds. She was embezzling trust. She was sowing seeds of doubt about my cognitive fitness, making the eventual discovery of the financial gaps seem like the result of my incompetence, rather than the cause of our conflict. By the time I exposed her, She wanted the community to believe that an old, confused woman had made up a conspiracy to cover her own mismanagement. The ultimate confrontation was set for the emergency board meeting Janet had called, ostensibly to discuss the final details of the Gala of Hope, which was now just 4 days away. But I knew the real agenda was the motion she had tabled, granting the treasurer sole signatory power. If that passed, she would have completely isolated me. She could loot the remaining $400,000 in our accounts, including all the forthcoming gala donations, with no one able to stop her. I walked into that meeting armed, not with paperwork, but with a strategy of strategic silence and minimal, targeted resistance. Lenny, my young prodigy, had warned me, "Don't show her your cards, Maria. If she knows you have the Vegas Vixen confession or the JAN accounts, she'll destroy the digital evidence before you can use it at the gala." The meeting was held in my beautiful mahogany-paneled conference room, my room, now filled with Janet's manufactured tension. Janet, again, opened the proceedings with an aura of practiced, weary professionalism. She detailed minor security concerns, emphasizing the necessity of streamlining bank access. She then brought up her motion. "Fellow board members, I must reiterate. Our current system requires Maria's handwritten authorization on every large transfer. This archaic process is slow and introduces unnecessary risk in an era of instant digital finance. To secure the beacon's future, we must centralize major decision-making power. I propose we vote on granting the treasurer sole signatory power, effective immediately." A distinguished board member, Mr. Hawthorne, cleared his throat. He looked directly at me, his eyes betraying deep concern. "Maria, what is your position on this? This is a significant change to our governance." I rose slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my composure absolute. I had to appear rational, calm, and utterly in control, the exact opposite of the stressed, forgetful woman Janet was painting. "My position, Mr. Hawthorne, is simple," I said. "I agree with Janet that modern finance requires modernization, but the purpose of dual signatory authority is not to slow down transfers. It is to prevent fraud. It is the last line of defense against temptation, no matter how small or large the amount." I paused, looking directly at Janet. Her smile was fixed and hard. "Janet has pointed out several inconsistencies in my past management," I continued. "I welcome a full, independent, third-party audit of our entire 20-year history. I have kept every receipt, every canceled check, and every ledger. I am confident my record will be proven clean. However, before we dismantle the one rule that protects our nonprofit from abuse, I ask the board one question." I pulled out a single sheet of paper from my portfolio, a printout of the $9,000 in admin fee compliance entries Lenny had found. "Janet," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "can you provide a single bank document, a regulation, or an email from our corporate bank liaison proving the necessity of these 7 recurring admin fee compliance transfers over the last 7 months, totaling over $9,000? Please provide that documentation to the board by tomorrow morning." I didn't accuse her of theft. I simply requested an audit trail for a suspiciously recurring fee. I had leveraged her insistence on modern accounting against her. If the fee was legitimate, the documentation would be instant. If it was fraudulent, she would panic. The effect was instantaneous. Janet's composure cracked. Her eyes flashed with fury, but her voice was strained. "This is a ridiculous tactic, Maria. You are grasping at straws and trying to derail critical governance changes with fabricated concerns. The documentation is voluminous and is part of the larger AML audit file, which, as I said, you wouldn't understand. Voluminous or not, Janet, $9,000 is $9,000 to our mothers," I countered calmly. "I simply require the proof of necessity by the end of the day tomorrow, before we consider signing away our fundamental security. If the fees are legitimate, the proof should be easy to find." The board was shaken. They saw the desperation in Janet's defense and the rock-solid calmness in my request. Mr. Hawthorne cleared his throat again. Janet, I think Maria's request for documentation on a specific recurring expense is reasonable before we vote on eliminating a long-standing security measure. We will table the motion until Friday afternoon. Please provide the compliance documentation by then. I had bought myself 3 crucial days. 3 days until the gala. 3 days until the inevitable final confrontation. As the meeting dispersed, Janet walked past me, her shoulders rigid. She paused by the doorway and leaned close, her breath smelling of mint and expensive, desperate secrets. "You're finished, Maria?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous threat. "I am going to expose your incompetence to this entire town, and when I do, I will be the hero who saved the organization from your dottery hands. You are too old for this fight. Just concede." I smiled, a quiet, sad, terrifying smile of certainty. "You've mistaken my strategy, Janet. I am not trying to fight you. I am simply giving you enough rope to hang yourself. I had the confession. I had the shell company. I had the evidence. Now, all that was left was the meticulous planning for the biggest night of the Beacon's year, the night I would lose my best friend but save my legacy." The 3 days leading up to the Friday meeting, and subsequently the gala, were a blur of cold strategy. Janet was busy playing the part of the meticulous, wronged professional, flooding the board's inboxes with dense, incomprehensible financial jargon she claimed explained the admin fee compliance. I, meanwhile, was preparing a far more devastating document. I called Lenny back in, bringing him into my office this time under the cover of a late-night inventory audit. The light streaming from the street lamps cast long shadows across the walls as I logged onto my guest account, ready to face the full scope of Janet's depravity. "The board won't believe a few screenshots of bank transfers, Lenny," I explained, my voice steady. "Janet will just say it's a shared account, or that the funds were mislabeled by the bank. I need the why. I need to show them the disease that drove her to do this. I need to prove that JAN Enterprises is a shell for her gambling debt." Lenny nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He had already established the link between JAN Enterprises and the recurring specific transfers labeled admin fee compliance. Now he drilled down into the destination of those transfers. "Okay, look at this, Maria," he said, pulling up a web of transactions. "This is the $1,200 transfer from last month. It went to an aggregator account, but from there, I can trace the final merchant code. It's for the Cyclone Club, digital wagering, an offshore casino." He pulled up another, and this one, the one for $950, went to Global Credit Services. That IP address belongs to a payday loan service that specializes in high-interest, short-term advances, often used to cover immediate, desperate losses. Lenny organized the data into a simple, horrifying spreadsheet. Date, amount, source, destination. October 28th, $1,150. Admin fee compliance. Monarch Slots. Offshore gaming. November 28th, $890. Admin fee compliance. Quick cash advance. High interest loan. December 28th, $1,300. Admin fee compliance. The Cyclone Club. Digital wagering. January 28th, $1,500. Admin fee compliance. Loan repayment global. She structured the shell company to look like a legitimate financial intermediary, Maria, but its only two functions are gambling and paying off debt, Lenny summarized, leaning back. The amounts she's siphoning through the admin fee transfers are directly funding her addiction or servicing the interest on her loans. That's the pattern. The recurring, smaller thefts keep the lights on for her habit, while the delayed, larger checks, like the Westwood money, are being used to pay down massive principal debts to keep the loan sharks at bay. The truth was laid bare in cold, hard numbers. I looked at the table and felt a deep, wrenching pity, quickly overridden by rage. This woman was so addicted that she was stealing from the very mothers who had nothing left. Then, I shifted the focus to the most critical piece of evidence, the online confession. Lenny, I need to make this ironclad, I instructed, pulling out the printouts of the Vegas Vixen 70 feet posts. I need to prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that the person writing this is Janet. Can you find any metadata? A login time? A location? Anything that pins this to her? Lenny spent another hour working, cross-referencing login times from the forum against our nonprofit's building security logs and Janet's publicly listed schedule. Okay, this is good, Maria, he said, pointing to a post where Janet, as Vegas Vixen 70, complained about having to skip a big online poker session because she had to attend a, quote, dreadfully boring, pointless local business meeting. The timestamp for this post, Lenny said, is 7:15 p.m. last Tuesday. Our board minutes confirm that Janet was present at the local Business Advisory Council dinner from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., where she would have had access to her phone. And look at this post's IP address. It pings to a coffee shop's public Wi-Fi on the corner of Elm and Fifth, right near the council dinner location. He continued, even better, in this post from 3 months ago, Vegas Vixen 70 feet mentions needing a large payout to cover a loan, or she'd have to sell the old cedar-paneled desk in her office. Janet's office, Maria, is the only cedar-paneled one in the building, and she was the one who personally sourced the paneling 5 years ago. The digital trail was complete. The Vegas Vixen 70 feet confession was irrefutably Janet's. I stood there, the evidence spread across the desk. The bank transfer spreadsheet, the JAN Enterprises Incorporation papers, the digital links to the casinos and loan sharks, and the online confession, a diary of her crime written in her own callous words. I felt a profound sense of closure, but not relief. The grief for the friend I had lost was overwhelming. I had spent 50 years loving her, and she had spent the last year meticulously planning my destruction. But the evidence was clear. She was not just a thief. She was a calculated criminal using my name and the needs of these vulnerable mothers as her personal ATM. I looked at the mountain of paper, then at Lenny. Thank you, Lenny. You have saved the beacon. What happens now, Maria? He asked, seeing the terrible weight in my eyes. Now, I said, gathering the printouts and placing them carefully into a secure, fireproof metal box. I prepare for the gala. She wants to use that stage to honor me and then destroy me. I will use it to tell the truth. The 3 days before the gala felt like the long, terrifying calm before a Category 5 hurricane. With the board meeting having resulted in the motion being tabled, Janet was forced to retreat, but she did so with barely concealed fury. My strategy was strategic silence. I adopted a demeanor of tired resignation. I avoided eye contact with Janet, answered questions with minimal, vague responses, and generally played the part of the frail, overwhelmed elderly woman she desperately wanted the community to see. I didn't push for the bank documentation. I simply waited. My goal was to lull Janet into a false sense of security. She needed to believe that I was defeated, that my concerns had been successfully dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of an old lady who didn't understand technology. If she thought I was a non-factor, she wouldn't destroy the critical evidence, the login files, the transfer records that Lenny needed for the final public display. I spent my time meticulously documenting and copying everything. The original printouts went into the metal box. Copies were given to Lenny, who was tasked with digitizing them into a single, high-resolution presentation file. He also prepared the necessary equipment, a secure laptop, a data projector, and a specific encrypted flash drive that would hold the confession and the financial documents. I also reached out to 2 of the single mothers who had recently benefited from our programs, Sarah and Carla. Sarah, Carla, I said, meeting them quietly after their weekly job training session. Have you noticed anything unusual about Janet lately? Sarah, who was intensely organized, nodded immediately. Mrs. Novak has been very short. She dismissed my request for a small emergency fund last month, even though the money was there. She told me I was too reliant on the beacon, but she gave the same money to another mother the next week. It felt arbitrary, almost cold. Carla added, she used to be so friendly, but lately she avoids looking us in the eye. A few weeks ago, I heard her on the phone in the hallway. She sounded frantic, talking about missing deadlines and selling assets. She looked up, saw me, and slammed the phone down. It felt like I saw a stranger, Maria. I listened, gathering these small human testimonies of Janet's escalating desperation and coldness. They wouldn't prove embezzlement, but they would prove character, the kind of character capable of betraying a community. The Gala of Hope was scheduled for Saturday night, a high-stakes event that generated nearly half of the Beacon's annual operating budget. It was held in the grand ballroom of the city's oldest hotel, attracting not only our major donors but the mayor, the city council chair, and the chief of police. Janet had, ironically, insisted on designing the program herself. The climax of the evening was set to be Janet's own speech, the treasurer's salute to the founder. It was her intended stage to publicly praise my past contributions while subtly, skillfully, framing me as an obsolete liability ready for retirement. The perfect opportunity to complete her character assassination. My plan was simple, high risk, and absolute. Phase 1, the setup. Lenny would arrive 2 hours before the gala, posing as a freelance AV technician I had hired to ensure the quality of the presentation. He would take control of the hotel's projection system, ensuring the encrypted laptop and flash drive were ready, the screen was calibrated, and the sound system was clear. He would sit near the back, ready to execute the sequence on my signal. Phase 2, the interception. As the gala progressed, I would wait patiently. When the master of ceremonies announced, "Now please welcome our esteemed treasurer Janet Novak for the keynote speech," I would act. I would intercept her on her walk to the stage, not with a confrontation, but with a predetermined maneuver, a sudden old age-induced stumble that would require me to take the microphone from the MC, ostensibly to steady myself. Once I had the stage, I wouldn't let go. Phase 3, the reckoning. I would start my speech by speaking from the heart about the Beacon, the mothers, and the meaning of integrity and betrayal. I would build the emotional connection with the audience before hitting them with the facts. I reviewed the final sequence with Lenny. 1. The confession. I would read a few key lines of the Vegas Vixen 70 Feet Forum post, culminating in the line about the dottery old friend. Signal to Lenny, a clearing of the throat. The audio of me reading the betrayal would be amplified throughout the ballroom. 2. The proof. I would then tell the audience that the person who wrote those words was their treasurer. Signal to Lenny, a nod of the head. The projector would then light up, showing the JAN Enterprises Incorporation papers and the web of transfers to the gambling sites and loan sharks. 3. The total betrayal. Finally, I would display the most damning image, the spreadsheet showing the delay in the Westwood check and the total amount skimmed from the organization. The night before the gala, I stood in my silent office, reviewing the sequence in my mind. The truth would save the Beacon, but it would shatter the life of my oldest friend. I felt no triumph, only a deep, weary sorrow. 50 years of history, traded for a few desperate bets on a glowing screen. I looked at the framed photograph on my desk, Janet and me, young women with wild, hopeful dreams, standing in front of the rundown building that would become the Beacon. I picked it up and placed it face down. I was ready. The fight for my integrity, my legacy, and my girls would begin on the stage tomorrow night. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House was a vision of expensive charity. Crystal chandeliers glittered over rows of white linen tables, and the air hummed with the sound of local power and philanthropy. I wore my best black velvet dress, the same one I'd worn to the first gala 20 years ago. I felt 75 years old, tired, and deeply heartbroken, but resolute. Tonight, I was not a doting founder. I was an executioner of truth. Janet arrived late, making a calculated entrance. She looked magnificent in a sapphire gown, radiating the confidence of someone completely in control of the narrative. She moved through the room, accepting compliments, flashing her practiced, charming smile. She approached my table, leaning in conspiratorially. "Maria, you look lovely," she purred, her eyes scanning the room. "Now, please try to remember the program. I'll be giving my speech around 9. Try to stay seated, dear. The steps are tricky. It was the final patronizing jab, a reminder of the role she had cast me in, the dottery old friend who needed babysitting. I simply offered a weak smile and a non-committal nod, reinforcing her certainty that I was neutralized. I scanned the room, locating my allies. Lenny, in a borrowed, ill-fitting suit, was tucked away near the projection booth, his face illuminated by the glow of his secure laptop. At a table near the front sat Sarah and Carla, two of the single mothers, dressed beautifully and serving as a quiet, vital reminder of the stakes. The evening progressed in a blur of small talk and successful bidding on silent auction items. At 9 p.m., the mayor, who was the master of ceremonies, stepped up to the podium. And now, the mayor's voice boomed, we reach the most important part of our evening. The treasurer's salute. Please welcome to the stage a woman whose tireless work behind the scenes keeps this beacon of hope burning brightly. Our esteemed treasurer, Janet Novak. A wave of polite applause swept the room. Janet rose smoothly, taking her time to acknowledge the applause, her sapphire gown catching the light. She began her purposeful, confident walk toward the stage. This was my moment. I pushed back my chair, letting the scraping sound cut across the polite murmurs. I stood, my legs surprisingly steady, and started walking toward the stage just as Janet reached the bottom step. I intercepted her exactly where I planned. "Oh, Janet, dear," I said loudly, putting a hand on her arm. "Just a moment. I feel a bit unsteady." Janet's eyes flashed with furious confusion. She didn't dare shake me off in public. I took advantage of her momentary paralysis, moving past her to the stage. I didn't rush. I walked slowly up the 2 steps and approached the podium, taking the microphone from the bewildered mayor, who was staring at me with a question mark on his face. I placed my hands on the podium, my knuckles white against the dark wood. Janet, standing frozen on the steps, hissed my name. "Maria? What are you doing?" "This is my segment." I ignored her. I looked out over the sea of faces. The mayor, the police chief, the major donors, and, most importantly, my girls. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and amplified, carrying a resonance that surprised even me. I apologize for the interruption, but I felt a sudden, pressing need to address you all directly. Tonight is about hope. It is about integrity, and tonight, before Janet gives her speech, we must deal with the truth. A profound, unnerving silence fell over the ballroom. I didn't look at Janet. I looked at the audience, speaking to the community I had served my entire life. The Beacon was founded on the principle that when life deals you a hard hand, you don't fold, you fight. We offer assistance, but we demand integrity. And sadly, that integrity has been fundamentally violated. I let the words hang there, heavy and accusatory. Janet was now scrambling up the steps behind me, her composure gone. "Maria? Stop this ridiculous behavior. You are clearly confused. I am asking security to escort her out," Janet shouted, grabbing my arm. I gently shook her off, turning my head only enough for my amplified voice to cut through hers. "I am not confused, Janet. I am enlightened." I returned my gaze to the crowd. Janet was going to speak tonight about my legacy. Instead, I will speak about hers. For months, Janet has been systematically stealing from this organization, taking money designated for single mothers, for rent, for childcare, to feed a desperate habit. A gasp rippled through the room. She has been stealing, and she has been attempting to frame me, her dottery old friend, to cover her tracks. She thought I was too old to follow a digital trail. She thought she could destroy my 50-year reputation to protect her secret. I cleared my throat, the signal to Lenny. But she was careless. When a thief plots her crime, she sometimes keeps a diary. Janet kept hers online, on a private gambling forum, under the username VegasVixen70feet. The ballroom fell silent again, this time a stunned, absolute quiet. I pulled out my printed copy of the confession thread, holding it up slightly. I began to read the line I had memorized. "I'm nearly clear. Just gotta pull off the gala score to pay the remaining principal. It's all gonna work. When the auditors come, I'll simply blame the inconsistencies on the dotard's age and confusion. She's already laying the groundwork for me by asking silly questions. Just gotta push out the old lady. The sound of my voice reading Janet's callous words was devastating. Janet screamed behind me. "Those are lies. A forgery. Maria, you are having a breakdown." I stepped aside from the podium. I gave Lenny the nod. The huge projection screen behind me, which had been displaying the Beacon's logo, suddenly flashed to life. The first image was the JAN Enterprises Incorporation certificate, followed by the spreadsheet Lenny had prepared. The Beacon to JAN Enterprises, the Trail of Vice. The screen was filled with the hard evidence. The recurring transfers labeled Admin Fee Compliance, each one with the final destination clearly listed: Monarch Slots, the Cyclone Club, Global Credit Services, High Interest Loans. I pointed to the screen, my voice resonating with sorrow and iron will. This is the legitimate, modern accounting that Janet was so desperate to protect from my old age. This shell company, JAN Enterprises, Janet Ann Novak, has been the conduit for theft. The room was in chaos. Donors were murmuring, board members were shouting, and Janet was desperately lunging for the projector cable. I raised my hands for silence, my gaze finding the mayor and the police chief. The total amount Janet has skimmed and attempted to steal, including the Westwood check she held for months, and the funds she intended to steal tonight, is over $114,000, I stated plainly. She was willing to destroy this organization and my life's work to feed a gambling debt. I turned and faced Janet, who stood frozen, the picture of a magnificent lie shattered into a million pieces. Her eyes were wide, not with anger, but with absolute terror. "Janet," I said, my voice dropping to a raw, personal whisper that somehow carried through the microphone. 50 years of friendship. I thought you were my rock. You were stealing from the only place that gives hope to women who have nothing. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every desperate mother and every trusting child we swore to protect. The mayor and the chief of police were already moving toward the stage. Janet, seeing the authorities closing in, made one last desperate attempt at defense. She's lying. She's old. She's confused. She's trying to cover her own errors, she screamed, pointing an accusing finger at me. But at that moment, Sarah and Carla stood up from their table. And then, every single mother who was in attendance stood up. They were Maria's people, and they stood in silent, unwavering unity. The police chief reached the stage and placed a calm, firm hand on Janet's arm. She offered no resistance, her mask of composure finally dissolving, leaving behind only the face of a desperate, broken addict caught in her own trap. As she was led away, the mayor turned to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. I looked out at the silent, watching room. I was devastated, heartbroken, but victorious. My integrity was intact, and the Beacon was safe. The Gala of Hope, I said, picking up the microphone again, my voice catching slightly. Will continue. The Beacon is still here. We have work to do. The room erupted, not in applause for a fundraiser, but in a roar of relief and support for the 75-year-old woman who had defended her legacy. My best friend was gone, but the foundation she tried to burn stood taller than ever. The theme of betrayal had played out, cruel and true, but the theme of integrity had ultimately won.